I was packing the last of my photo frames when it hit me. 3 years in Seattle, and now my sister Amelia's wedding invitation arrived addressed to my parents' house in Cedar Rapids. The irony was painful. My family expected me at the wedding, yet no one had noticed I left Iowa. 29 years of feeling invisible finally led me to build a life where I was seen. Why go back now? Before I dive into my story, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Hit that like button and subscribe to see more stories of family drama and healing journeys. Growing up as the middle child in the Hunter family came with an unofficial title, the Invisible Daughter, while my older sister Amelia excelled academically and my younger brother Jackson dominated athletics. I existed in the shadows between their spotlights. My father Richard was a prominent surgeon at the University Hospital, known throughout Cedar Rapids for his skilled hands and analytical mind. My mother Diana built her real estate empire through charisma and determination qualities she shared with my siblings, but seemed to find lacking in me. I was quiet observant, drawn to art and photography rather than science or sports. My camera became my voice, capturing the world, as I saw it full of overlooked details and quiet beauty. But in a family of loud achievements, my artistic pursuits registered as background noise. I still remember my senior year art exhibition. I had worked for months perfecting a series of black and white photographs exploring identity and belonging. The teacher had called them exceptional. Parents and students filled the school auditorium, admiring the displays and congratulating young artists. Everyone had someone there except me. They got caught up at Amelia's debate tournament, I explained to my art teacher when she asked my smile firmly in place, though something inside me crumbled. I waited 3 hours checking my phone periodically before packing up my photographs myself. Later that night, I heard them come home, their voices animated as they discussed Amelia's victory. "You should have seen her final argument," my father said. "Completely dismantled the opposing team." I stood in the kitchen doorway waiting for a pause a moment to mention my exhibition. "Leontine, can you grab the takeout from the counter?" my mother asked, not looking up from the trophy she was admiring. "We were too busy celebrating to cook." I nodded, retrieving the Chinese food containers. "I had my photography exhibition tonight," I said, keeping my voice casual as I distributed plates. "That was tonight." My mother frowned briefly. "I thought that was next week." "It was on the calendar," I said softly. My father looked up briefly. "Well, how did it go? Did you win anything?" I wanted to explain it wasn't a competition that my teacher had said I showed professional promise that 3 pieces had sold. Instead, I just shook my head. It was fine. "Leontine's always taking pictures of weird stuff anyway," Jackson said through a mouthful of lo mein, "like old people in trash cans." "Street photography," I corrected, but no one was listening. The conversation had already shifted to Amelia's college applications. This pattern repeated throughout my childhood and teenage years. My high school graduation fell the day after Amelia received her medical school acceptance letter. What should have been my celebration dinner turned into a continuation of toasting her success. When I won my first photography contest, the notification email arrived the same day as Jackson's state championship game. I mentioned it once at breakfast, received distracted congratulations, and never brought it up again. I developed a talent for observing rather than participating. I could predict exactly when my mother would interrupt a story I was telling to point out something Amelia or Jackson had done. I knew precisely when my father's eyes would glaze over if I discussed photography techniques. Family gatherings became exercises in invisibility, where I served food, took candid photos, everyone later praised and answered the same questions about when I would find a real career instead of just taking pictures. In my mind, I began to think of myself as the family's wallpaper, present, occasionally commented on, but ultimately just background for the real features of the home. I existed to fill space to maintain symmetry, but not to draw attention or consideration. By the time I finished college, the seeds of escape had been growing for years. I just needed the right moment, the final push that would give me courage to uproot myself from this place where I was perpetually overshadowed. I moved back home after college graduation with what I told myself were practical motivations: save money, build my portfolio, establish client connections in a familiar area. The truth, which I barely admitted to myself, was that some childish part of me still hoped for recognition from my family, to finally see me. That hope died completely on my 26th birthday. I had mentioned it casually at dinner the week before. "I was thinking we could try that new Italian restaurant on Friday for my birthday," I said during a rare lull in conversation. My mother nodded absently while checking her phone. "That sounds nice, honey. Friday at 7? "Perfect," I replied, allowing myself a small spark of anticipation. Friday arrived and I spent extra time getting ready. I wore a new dress, styled my hair, even applied makeup, something I rarely bothered with. The restaurant had moody lighting and exposed brick walls that created the perfect backdrop for celebration. I arrived early, secured a table for 5, and waited. 7 o'clock came and went, then 7:30. At 7:45, I texted my mother, "Are you on the way?" The response came quickly. "On the way, where is something wrong?" My stomach dropped as I typed, "The Italian restaurant, for my birthday dinner." 3 dots appeared and disappeared several times before her reply. "Oh, Leontine, that was tonight. We're at the hospital. Your father just got called into emergency surgery and we're supporting him. Can we reschedule for tomorrow?" I stared at the message, the weight of invisibility pressing on my chest until it was hard to breathe. I paid for my single glass of wine, apologized to the server for the unused reservation, and drove home in silence. The house was dark when I arrived. No emergency surgery then. I checked social media and found the Truth family selfies at Jackson's surprise basketball team dinner. All of them smiling, celebrating having completely forgotten our plans and apparently my existence. I sat on my childhood bed surrounded by photography awards no one had ever acknowledged, and finally confronted reality. Nothing would ever change as long as I remained. My invisibility was too established, too convenient for everyone involved. That night, while tears dried on my cheeks, I opened my laptop and searched for photography opportunities far away from Cedar Rapids. A prestigious mentorship program in Seattle caught my attention immediately. The application deadline was in 3 days. I stayed up all night perfecting my portfolio submission. 2 weeks later, the acceptance email arrived. 1 year of personalized mentorship with Gabriela Martinez, an award-winning photographer whose work I had admired for years. The program included a small stipend, connections to local galleries, and potential client referrals. It was everything I could have hoped for, a perfect escape route. I began packing incrementally, selling furniture online, digitizing old photographs, donating clothes. No one noticed the gradual emptying of my room. No one questioned why I suddenly had extra money or why I was researching Seattle weather patterns. The day before my departure, I sat through one last family breakfast. My father discussed a complicated surgery. My mother detailed her latest property listing. Amelia called to share news about her medical residency. Jackson talked about college basketball recruitment. No one asked about my plans for the day or why I was quieter than usual. After breakfast, I finished packing my remaining belongings into 2 suitcases and a carry-on. I placed a brief note on my bed. "Taking a photography opportunity in Seattle. Will call when I'm settled. Love, Leontine." I didn't expect anyone to find it for days, maybe a week. The cleaning service came on Thursdays, and my mother rarely entered my room otherwise. The Uber arrived at noon. As I wheeled my luggage down the driveway, my father pulled in from his morning hospital rounds. He waved absently from the car, not even rolling down his window to ask why I had suitcases. The perfect final confirmation that I was making the right choice. The journey to Seattle was a blur of conflicting emotions. Grief for the family connections I had craved but never truly had. Fear of starting over completely alone. And beneath it all, a surprising sense of liberation. For the first time, I would be in a place where no one had preconceived notions of who I was or where I belonged in the hierarchy. A week after arriving in Seattle, I called home. My mother answered on the 4th ring. "Leontine." "How are you, honey? Sorry I missed your call yesterday. We had the hospital fundraiser." I hadn't called yesterday. "I'm good, just checking in." "That's nice. Did you see that Amelia got published in that medical journal I emailed you the link?" "No, but that's great," I said. "Mom, did you find my note?" "What note, sweetie? Oh, hold on. Your father wants to tell you about Jackson's new coach." The conversation continued for 15 minutes. No one asked where I was calling from. No one had noticed I was gone. Even when I mentioned finding an apartment, my mother simply said, "That's nice, dear. Is it close to our house?" because with gas prices these days, commuting is so expensive. Rather than correct her assumption, I simply agreed. It's not too far. Over the weeks that followed, the calls became less frequent. When they did happen, they followed the same pattern: family news. No questions about my life. No recognition that I lived in a different state. Eventually, they stopped almost completely. Seattle greeted me with a week of characteristic rain that matched my emotional state. My small studio apartment in the Arts District had just enough room for a bed desk and makeshift darkroom in the bathroom. The deposit and first month's rent took nearly all my savings, but I felt a strange pride in this space that was entirely mine. My first meeting with Gabriela Martinez was scheduled for my third day in the city. Her studio occupied the top floor of a converted warehouse, filled with natural light and striking photographs of urban landscapes and overlooked people that had made her famous. I arrived 30 minutes early, heart-pounding portfolio clutched to my chest. When she finally swept in, she was nothing like I'd expected. Instead of the intimidating artistic genius I'd imagined, Gabriella was warm, casual, dressed in jeans with paint-stained fingers and a quick laugh. "Let me see what you've got, Leontine," she said, pronouncing my name correctly on the first try, something that rarely happened back home. I spread my photographs across her massive workable, trying to control my trembling hands. For 10 minutes, she said nothing, just examined each image with complete focus. The silence stretched until I was certain I'd made a terrible mistake. Finally, she looked up. "You have a gift for seeing what others miss," she said. "The invisible moments, the overlooked details. There's so much empathy in your work." Her words struck so deeply that tears sprang to my eyes before I could stop them. She noticed immediately. "What is it?" "It's just," I struggled to explain. "No one's ever really looked at my work like that before." She studied me with the same intensity she'd given my photographs. "Well, they should have. You have a unique perspective. That's what we'll cultivate this year." That first meeting changed everything. For the first time, my artistic vision wasn't just acknowledged, but celebrated. Gabriella pushed me, technically challenged me conceptually, but never made me feel inadequate or invisible. 2 weeks into the mentorship, I met Tasha at a gallery opening Gabriella had insisted I attend. Tasha managed the small but respected gallery and approached me when she noticed me photographing the interesting shadows created by the track lighting rather than the artwork itself. "You must be Gabriella's new protege," she said, offering me a glass of wine. "She mentioned you have an eye for the overlooked." That night turned into dinner, which evolved into a friendship unlike any I'd experienced before. Tasha was vibrant, direct, and genuinely interested in my perspective. She asked questions and actually waited for the answers. She remembered details about my work and my preferences. She saw me. Through Gabriella and Tasha, my world expanded. I met other photographers, artists, gallery owners, people who valued my quiet observations and artistic eye. I developed my own style, focusing on urban details and overlooked moments that told stories most people rushed past without noticing. 6 months after arriving in Seattle, I had my first small gallery showing, 5 photographs in a group exhibition of emerging artists. As I stood nervously by my work, watching strangers pause and consider my vision, something inside me began to heal. "These are remarkable," an older man said, studying my photograph of an elderly woman feeding pigeons, her weathered hands telling a story of decades of the same ritual. "You've made the ordinary extraordinary." My birthday arrived 8 months into my Seattle life. I mentioned it casually to Tasha during coffee the week before. The day itself, I expected nothing, conditioned by years of disappointment. Instead, I opened my apartment door to find a small package, a vintage camera lens I'd admired in a shop window, wrapped with a note from Gabriella. My phone pinged with well wishes from the small but meaningful circle I'd begun to build. That evening, Tasha insisted on taking me to dinner. When we arrived at the restaurant, 5 other friends were waiting. A cake, with my name correctly spelled, sat on the table, and handmade cards were stacked beside my plate. "Happy birthday, Leontine," they chorused, absolutely none of them forgetting why we were gathered. I cried then, unable to explain that this was the first real birthday celebration I could remember. Tasha, somehow understanding anyway, simply squeezed my hand and passed me a tissue. "Get used to it," she whispered. "You're not invisible here." The next day, I received a text from my mother. Hope your week is going well. Jackson made the varsity team again. No mention of my birthday, not even a day late. Somehow it hurt less than it would have before. As 1 year in Seattle became 2, then 3, my career gained momentum. My mentor relationship with Gabriella evolved into a professional collaboration on several projects. Tasha's Gallery gave me my first solo exhibition. A local magazine hired me for regular assignment work. My Instagram following grew steadily as my distinct photographic voice resonated with people. I created a series called Invisible People that captured service workers, the elderly, and other society tends to overlook. The irony wasn't lost on me. The series won a regional photography award and led to a commission from the city for a public installation. With each success, each new friendship, each moment of recognition, the pain of my family's indifference faded a little more. I called home less and less, finding the familiar pattern of one-sided conversations increasingly distant from my new reality. When I did call, I never corrected their continuing assumption that I still lived nearby. The conversations were so superficial, so focused on my siblings' achievements, that it seemed pointless to assert my truth. In the quietest moments, I sometimes wondered if they'd ever actually read the note I'd left, if anyone had entered my room and noticed my absence, if they ever truly saw me at all. The large manila envelope arrived on a Tuesday, my day off. I recognized my mother's handwriting immediately, the familiar loops and flourishes addressing the package to my parents' home in Cedar Rapids, with "Please forward" written across the top. Somehow, through the Postal Service's mysterious workings, it had found me. Inside was an elaborate cream-colored invitation with silver embossing. Dr. and Mrs. Richard Hunter request the honor of your presence at the marriage of their daughter, Amelia Grace Hunter, to Dr. Thomas James Wilson. The invitation included all the expected details: ceremony, at First Presbyterian Church reception, at the Cedar Rapids Country Club RSVP card, with meal options. What struck me wasn't the formality or elegance of the invitation, but the family photograph tucked inside. My parents stood behind Amelia and her fiancé, my brother Jackson, at their side. They were posed in our family living room, smiling broadly. The space where I should have stood was conspicuously empty, though no one in the photo seemed to notice the asymmetry. They hadn't even tried to balance the composition. My absence was unremarkable to them. I sat at my kitchen table staring at the invitation for nearly an hour. My carefully constructed new life suddenly felt thin, a temporary escape rather than a permanent solution. All the pain and invisibility I thought I'd processed came rushing back with surprising force. That evening, my phone rang with my mother's number. "Leontine, did you get Amelia's invitation? Isn't it beautiful? The photographer did such a lovely job with the family portrait." I swallowed hard. "Yes, I got it today." "Wonderful. So we need you here next weekend to start helping with preparations. Amelia wants all the bridesmaids to do a trial run with the hairstylist on Saturday, and then Sunday is the first dress fitting." I froze, confusion overtaking me. Bridesmaids. "Of course, silly, you're her sister. Now, I know you haven't always been close, but Amelia specifically requested you be part of the bridal party. Isn't that lovely of her?" My mind raced. Not only did they expect me to attend the wedding, but my mother was talking as if I could simply drive over next weekend, as if I still lived in Cedar Rapids, as if nothing had changed in 3 years. "Mom," I started, then faltered. "How do you tell your mother that you moved across the country 3 years ago, and she never noticed, 'I'm not sure I can make it next weekend'?" "What do you mean you can't make it? What could possibly be more important than your sister's wedding preparations? You know how Amelia gets. She'll be devastated." The familiar guilt began creeping in, the lifetime training of putting my needs last asserting itself despite 3 years of recovery. "I have work commitments," I said weakly. "Well, surely they can spare you for your only sister's wedding. This isn't just any weekend, Leontine." "I know, but—" I trailed off, unable to form the words that would shatter the bizarre illusion my family had maintained. "I'm putting your father on. Maybe he can talk some sense into you." Before I could protest, my father's authoritative voice came through the phone. "Leontine, what's this about not helping with Amelia's wedding? You know how important this is to the whole family." The whole family. The irony nearly made me laugh. "Dad, I'm sorry, but I can't just drop everything to be there next weekend." I don't understand this attitude, Leontine. You live 15 minutes away. What could possibly be keeping you so busy that you can't spare a few hours for family? I ended the call promising to figure something out. The coward's way out, but all I could manage in the moment. That night, I invited Gabriella and Tasha over for emergency wine and advice. I spread the invitation and family photo on my coffee table, like evidence at a crime scene. Let me get this straight, Tasha said after I explained her expression incredulous. You moved across the country 3 years ago and your family hasn't noticed. They notice I'm not physically present at specific events, I clarified, but they've never questioned where I am or why. They just assume I'm busy with something less important than whatever they're doing. And now they expect you to be a bridesmaid in your sister's wedding, Gabriella added, studying the family photo with professional interest, without ever acknowledging that you live in Seattle. Yes, honey, Tasha said gently. That's not normal. That's not just being overlooked. I don't even know what that is. It's exactly why you left, Gabriella pointed out. They didn't notice you were gone because they never really saw you were there in the first place. Her words hit me with stunning clarity. My invisibility wasn't something I imagined or exaggerated. It was so complete that my physical relocation to another state didn't even register as unusual. The question is, Tasha said, refilling my wine glass, what are you going to do now? I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to ignore the invitation entirely, send a gift and move on with my life. And the other part, Gabriella prompted, wants to show up as the person I've become, to finally be seen on my own terms. They exchanged a look I couldn't quite interpret. What? They didn't notice you left, Tasha said slowly, because you never forced them to see you. You left a note and then played along with their assumption that nothing had changed. Maybe it's time to be visible loudly and undeniably visible. She's right, Gabriella added. You've spent 3 years building a life where you're valued. Maybe it's time to bring that confidence home and demand the recognition you deserve. I considered their words, weighing my fear of confrontation against my desire for acknowledgement. I don't even know how to begin having that conversation. Start by showing up, Tasha suggested. The rest will follow. That night after they left, I booked a flight to Cedar Rapids for the wedding. I requested time off from my assignments. I gathered a portfolio of my professional work, my awards evidence of the life I'd built without them. As the wedding date approached, my anxiety intensified. I had nightmares about arriving at the church to find no one recognized me. I dreamt of becoming literally transparent people looking through me as if I weren't there. I called Tasha nearly every day for reassurance, and she patiently reminded me of my strength, my achievements, my right to be seen. The night before my flight, I stood in my Seattle apartment looking at all the evidence of my successful escape and wondered if I was making a terrible mistake by going back even temporarily. But underneath the fear was a flicker of something else, the determination to finally be visible to the people who should have seen me all along. The familiar humidity of Iowa in June hit me as I exited the Cedar Rapids airport, a sharp contrast to Seattle's mild summer. Everything looked smaller than I remembered the airport, the roads, even the sky, somehow less expansive than the Pacific Northwest vistas I'd grown accustomed to. I decided to rent a car rather than ask for a pickup, wanting to maintain control over my movements. The drive to my hotel downtown, rather than to my parents' suburban home, felt like a small but significant act of independence. After checking in, I spent the afternoon walking through my old neighborhood, noting what had changed and what remained stubbornly the same. The coffee shop where I'd spent countless hours editing photos had closed. My high school looked freshly painted, but otherwise identical. The park where I'd practiced landscape photography had added a new playground, but kept the old oak tree I'd photographed through all 4 seasons for a school project. I delayed going to my parents' house until early evening, timing my arrival for when I knew my mother would be home from showing properties, but before my father returned from the hospital. A strategic decision to limit my initial re-entry. The house looked exactly as I remembered: immaculate landscaping, tasteful exterior, the embodiment of upper-middle-class success. I stood in the driveway for several minutes, steeling myself before ringing the doorbell to my own childhood home. My mother opened the door, her expression shifting from professional greeting to surprise. "Leontine, what are you doing standing on the porch? Did you forget your key?" "Hi, Mom." I said, my carefully rehearsed speech evaporating instantly. No, it didn't seem right to walk in. She frowned slightly, then noticed my suitcase. Why do you have luggage? Are you going somewhere after the wedding? This was it, the moment of truth I'd been avoiding for 3 years. I took a deep breath. Mom, I moved to Seattle 3 years ago. She stared at me blankly. What are you talking about, Seattle? That's across the country. Yes, I left a note on my bed explaining I'd taken a photography mentorship there. I've been living in Seattle for 3 years now. She continued staring, her expression cycling through confusion, disbelief, and the beginnings of hurt. That's not possible. You call us. We talk about local things. No, Mom, you talk about local things and assume I know what you're referring to. I just never corrected you. This is absurd, she said, her voice rising slightly. If you'd moved across the country, we would know. Your father and I would know. I pulled out my phone, showing her my Seattle apartment photos with friends, my studio space exhibition openings, all dated and geotagged. I've built a whole life there, Mom, a successful one. She backed up slightly, bumping into the entryway table. I don't understand. Why would you leave without telling us? Why would you pretend during phone calls? The garage door opened before I could answer, signaling my father's arrival. My mother's face shifted to panic. Richard, she called as he entered. Leontine says she's been living in Seattle for 3 years. Tell her that's not true. My father stopped abruptly, briefcase still in hand. He looked between us, confusion evident. What's going on? Seattle? What are you talking about? Dad, I said, summoning all my courage. I moved to Seattle 3 years ago for a photography opportunity. I left a note explaining everything. That's impossible, he said automatically. We would have noticed something like that. Would you, though? I asked quietly. When was the last time either of you came into my room? When was the last time you asked me about my life, instead of telling me about Amelia or Jackson? A heavy silence fell. My mother sank into a chair, my father remained frozen in the entryway, and I stood with my suitcase like a visitor in what should have been my home. This is a joke, my father finally said. Some kind of prank for Amelia's wedding. It's not a joke. I've been gone for 3 years building a career you never asked about, making friends who actually see me creating a life where I'm valued. That's not fair, my mother protested. Of course we value you. When was my last birthday? I challenged. What photography award did I win last year? Who are my friends? What's the name of the magazine I shoot for regularly? Their silence was answer enough. You don't know these things because you never asked. I became invisible in this family, and when I physically disappeared, it didn't even register because I was already gone to you. My father's expression hardened. So this is what, some elaborate guilt trip, a way to ruin your sister's wedding with dramatic accusations? No, I said firmly. This is me finally being honest about why I left and what I've done since then. I didn't come to cause drama. I came because despite everything, you're still my family, and some part of me still hoped that might mean something. The doorbell rang, interrupting our standoff. My mother wiped her eyes quickly before answering it, revealing my sister Amelia and her fiancé Thomas. Mom, the florist completely messed up the sample centerpieces and the wedding planner isn't answering my calls. Amelia burst out before noticing me. Leontine, you're early. I thought you weren't coming until tomorrow for the bridesmaids' brunch. I stared at my sister, wondering how to explain everything in this moment. Before I could respond, my brother Jackson appeared behind her, his tall frame filling the doorway. Leo's here, awesome, he said, using the childhood nickname that only he had ever used. Then he noticed the tension. Whoa, what's going on? Did something happen? Apparently, my father said with barely controlled anger. Your sister has been living in Seattle for 3 years without telling anyone. Jackson's eyebrows shot up. Wait, you guys didn't know that? I thought everyone knew. All eyes turned to him. You knew? My mother asked incredulously. Well, yeah, he said, looking uncomfortable. Leo and I text sometimes. She sent me pictures of her apartment when she first moved, and I follow her photography Instagram. She's kind of a big deal in Seattle now. His casual acknowledgement of my life and success nearly brought tears to my eyes. All this time, at least one person in my family had seen me. Amelia looked between us, all clearly struggling to process this new information, while simultaneously stressing about wedding details. I don't understand what the big deal is. So Leontine moved. People move all the time. Can we please focus on the fact that my wedding is in 3 days and the florist is ruining everything? It was such a perfect encapsulation of our family dynamic that I almost laughed. Even this revelation was less important than Amelia's concerns. Why don't we all sit down for dinner and discuss this calmly? My mother suggested, her social training kicking in. Thomas, you'll stay, of course. Jackson, help your father set an extra place. Just like that, the pattern reasserted itself. The crisis of my 3-year absence would be smoothed over, minimized, and eventually forgotten in favor of more important matters, namely Amelia's wedding. I considered refusing walking out, returning to my hotel, and possibly to Seattle without further engagement, but Jackson caught my eye and gave me a small, encouraging nod. At least one person wanted to hear my story. The dinner that followed was tense with conversation, artificially directed towards safe topics: wedding details, Thomas's medical career, Jackson's graduate studies. My parents carefully avoided direct questions about Seattle, though I caught them giving me bewildered glances when they thought I wasn't looking. After dessert, Amelia and Thomas left to deal with more wedding emergencies. My parents retreated to the kitchen, ostensibly to clean up, but clearly to process in private. Jackson lingered at the table with me. "I'm sorry," he said simply. "For what? For not saying something sooner. For being part of why you felt invisible here." His apology, unexpected and sincere, broke through my carefully maintained composure. "You were just a kid, Jackson. It wasn't your responsibility to make me feel seen." "Maybe not then, but I'm not a kid anymore. And I should have told them you moved instead of assuming they knew. I just thought, I don't know what I thought, that they were respecting your space or something." I smiled sadly. That would require noticing I needed space in the first place. "For what it's worth," he said, "I've always thought your photography was incredible. I have that print you sent me framed in my apartment, the one of the old man with all the birds in the park. My friends always ask about it." Those words, so simple but so meaningful, were the first real acknowledgement from my family of my artistic identity. It was a small thing, perhaps, but in that moment, it meant everything. The morning of Amelia's wedding arrived with picture-perfect weather, and my own personal storm of anxiety. I prepared in my hotel room, applying my makeup with techniques learned from countless photo shoot observations. My dress, a sophisticated emerald that complemented the bridal party colors without matching them exactly, was my quiet statement of independence. When I arrived at the church, the parking lot was already filled with guests. Inside, distant relatives and family friends milled about, greeting each other with the familiar enthusiasm of people who see each other primarily at weddings and funerals. "Leontine, is that you?" My great-aunt Marjorie peered at me through rhinestone-studded glasses. "My goodness, we haven't seen you in ages. Your mother said you've been terribly busy with work. Something with pictures." "Professional photography," I corrected gently. "I've been building my career in Seattle." "Seattle." She looked confused. "What on earth are you doing way out there? Your family's here." Before I could respond, a cousin intercepted. "Leontine. Wow, I almost didn't recognize you. When did you move away? Your mom told me you were just finding yourself." Whatever that means. The encounters continued, each revealing a different story my parents had apparently told to explain my absence. I was focusing on career development, according to some traveling for work, according to others, and simply too busy for family gatherings, according to my father's golf partners. No one had been told the truth that I had left the state and built a new life without anyone noticing or asking substantive questions for 3 years. I slipped away from the crowd toward the bridal room, where I found Amelia surrounded by bridesmaids in matching robes, her hair half done, looking simultaneously radiant and frantic. "The photographer's assistant called in sick," she announced when she spotted me. "Can you believe it? On my wedding day. The photographer says she can manage but won't be able to get all the detail shots I wanted." I hesitated in the doorway. "I could help if you want. I do have some experience." She looked up, really seeing me for perhaps the first time that day. You would do that even after, she gestured vaguely, presumably referencing our tense family dinner. You're still my sister, Amelia. She dismissed her makeup artist for a moment and pulled me into a quiet corner. Look, I know I've been self-absorbed my whole life. I'm not completely oblivious to that fact. This frank self-assessment surprised me into silence. And I get why you left, she continued. I do. This family has always had a way of creating roles for people and then making it impossible to break out of them. Your role wasn't exactly a hardship, I pointed out. The golden child gets a lot of perks. And a lot of pressure, she countered. Do you know how terrified I've always been of failing, of being anything less than exceptional? At least no one expected anything from you. The words stung despite the grain of truth they contained. They expected nothing because they saw nothing, I said quietly. That's different from having no expectations. Amelia was silent for a moment. I've been jealous of you, you know. Of me? That's hard to believe. You got to leave, to reinvent yourself somewhere new, without the weight of family expectations. You got freedom. I got a perfectly plotted life path that allows for approximately zero deviation. I studied my sister, seeing complexity in her I'd never fully appreciated before. Are you happy, though, with Thomas, with your career, with the life you've chosen? Most days, she said with surprising honesty. But I sometimes wonder about the roads not taken. She glanced at her diamond engagement ring. But enough psychology. We have a wedding to get through. Will you really help with the photos? It would mean a lot to me. Of course. The ceremony proceeded with traditional precision. I alternated between my role as sister and unofficial photography assistant, capturing candid moments the hired photographer missed while managing formal shots. I noticed dynamics I'd been blind to as a child, the way my father subtly directed all family interactions. My mother's practiced smile that never quite reached her eyes, the extended family's clear deference to Amelia as the family star. At the reception, I discovered I'd been seated at a table with distant cousins, rather than at the family table. Another small but telling indicator of my peripheral status. Rather than protest, I used the opportunity to circulate photographing guest interactions and reception details. I was adjusting my camera settings near the bar when I overheard my mother speaking to her bridge club friends. Leontine, oh, she's just going through a phase. Moved to Seattle on some artistic quest or something. You know how creative types are always seeking inspiration. She'll be back once she realizes how important family is. The dismissive tone, the casual minimization of my career and life choices, the absolute certainty that my independence was temporary rather than a valid life path, all hit me with unexpected force. 3 years of building confidence, of creating an identity separate from my family, of being valued for my talent and perspective. And she could still reduce it all to a phase with a few careless words. Something inside me snapped. The careful restraint I'd maintained crumbled, replaced by a determination to be seen, truly seen by the people who had spent a lifetime looking past me. I approached the family table, camera in hand, but not as a shield this time. Mom, Dad, Jackson, I need to speak with you. My father frowned at the interruption. Leontine, this isn't the time. We're celebrating your sister's marriage. I understand that, and I'll be brief, but I need to say this. I pulled out my phone and brought up images of my Seattle gallery exhibition, my award ceremony, my published work. This is my life now. Not a phase, not a temporary artistic quest, but my career and my home. My mother glanced around nervously at nearby tables. Leontine, people are watching. Good, I said firmly, because I'm tired of not being watched, not being seen, not being acknowledged by my own family. Jackson reached for my hand supportively. My father's expression hardened. What exactly do you want from us? He asked. Congratulations for running away without a proper goodbye. Applause for abandoning your family. I want acknowledgement, I said simply. That I left, that I've built something meaningful, that my absence was notable. I want you to stop pretending I'm just temporarily out of sight, rather than building a life across the country. We acknowledge it, my mother said quickly, clearly trying to end the conversation. There, it's acknowledged. Can we please return to Amelia's special day now? No, I said, surprising myself with my firmness. Acknowledgement isn't just words, it's actions. It's asking questions about my life. It's recognizing that I'm a professional photographer with awards and gallery showings, not just someone who takes pictures as a hobby. My father stood abruptly. I think you've made your point, Leontine, and managed to draw attention away from your sister on her wedding day, which I assume was your goal all along. The accusation hurt, but I held my ground. That was never my intention. I just wanted for once to be seen by my own family. I see you. The voice came from behind me. Amelia stood there in her wedding dress, Thomas at her side. I see that you're talented enough to build a career I never could have. I see that you had the courage to leave when I only dreamed of it. And yes, I see that we all failed you by not noticing something as significant as you moving across the country. Her words, spoken with genuine emotion, silenced everyone at the table. Even my father seemed taken aback by her intervention. Thank you, I said simply. But, Amelia continued, her tone shifting slightly, I also see that this is my wedding day, and I'd really appreciate if we could postpone the family therapy session until tomorrow. There it was, the familiar redirection back to Amelia's needs. But this time it didn't feel quite as dismissive. There was acknowledgement in her words and a promise of future conversation, rather than perpetual avoidance. Of course, I agreed. Today is your day. As the evening progressed, I felt a subtle shift in my family's interactions with me. My father awkwardly asked about my photography business, clearly uncomfortable, but making an effort. My mother examined the portfolio images on my phone with surprise that seemed genuinely impressed. Jackson proudly introduced me to his friends as my sister, the award-winning photographer. I left the reception early, emotionally exhausted, but standing taller than when I'd arrived. For the first time, I demanded visibility rather than accepting invisibility. And while the result wasn't perfect, it was a beginning. The morning after the wedding, I met my parents for breakfast at a neutral location, a downtown cafe I'd suggested, rather than the family home. The setting felt important, a place where we were all visitors, rather than me entering their established territory. My mother arrived first, looking tired but composed. My father joined us minutes later, his expression unreadable behind his practiced professional demeanor. Thank you for meeting me, I began after we'd ordered coffee. I know yesterday was emotional for everyone. Leontine, my mother said hesitantly. I want to apologize, not just for yesterday, but for, it seems, for years of not seeing you properly. The directness of her acknowledgement surprised me. Thank you. That means a lot. I've been thinking about it all night, she continued, trying to understand how we could have missed something as significant as you moving across the country. And the only explanation is that we weren't paying attention. We weren't seeing you. My father cleared his throat. Your mother and I discussed this at length. While I still think your method of leaving was unnecessary, I recognize that we created the circumstances that made you feel it was your only option. It wasn't a full apology, but from my father, it was significant. I don't want to dwell on blame, I said carefully. What's done is done. I built a life I love in Seattle, and in many ways I needed to leave to find myself outside of this family's shadow. But I would like to find a way forward, where we can have a relationship based on who I actually am, not who you expected me to be. We'd like that too, my mother said quickly. Tell us about your life in Seattle. Your real life, not the polite version. For the next hour, I shared the details of my Seattle existence. My apartment with its tiny balcony overlooking the city. My studio space shared with two other photographers. My friendship with Tasha and mentorship with Gabriella. My creative process and the themes that dominated my work. My struggles and triumphs. Setbacks and breakthroughs. My mother asked thoughtful questions about my daily routines and living situation. My father, more awkward but trying, inquired about the business aspects of my career, something he could relate to more easily than the creative elements. Would you like to see my work? I offered, pulling out my professional portfolio. Not just the Instagram version, but what I consider my best photographs. They nodded, and I spread the images across the table. Urban landscapes capturing overlooked beauty and forgotten corners. Portraits of elderly individuals whose life experiences mapped their faces. street scenes, freezing moments of unexpected connection between strangers. These are, my father paused clearly, searching for the right words, powerful. I never realized photography could convey so much emotion. This one, my mother said, pointing to a photograph of an elderly woman feeding birds. It makes me feel both sad and hopeful at the same time. How do you do that? By seeing beyond the surface, I explained. By finding the story in ordinary moments. Like you've always done, she said softly. Even as a child, you were always watching, noticing things the rest of us missed. Her recognition of this fundamental aspect of my personality, something I'd felt had gone unseen for decades, touched me deeply. We'd like to visit you, my father said suddenly, in Seattle, if that would be all right. The offer stunned me. You would? We should see where our daughter lives, he said simply, if you'll have us. I'd like that, I replied, meaning it despite my surprise. Maybe in a few months when you've had time to adjust to being empty nesters again. We exchanged proper contact information, including my Seattle address. My mother input it carefully into her phone, as if afraid it might disappear if she didn't capture it correctly. My father wrote it in his leather planner in his precise handwriting. This doesn't fix everything, I said as we prepared to leave. There are years of patterns that won't change overnight. We know, my mother acknowledged, but it's a start. As I prepared to return to Seattle the following day, I felt both heavier and lighter. The confrontation had been necessary but draining. The beginnings of understanding were hopeful but fragile. I had no illusions that one emotional wedding weekend would transform my family dynamics completely, but for the first time I'd insisted on being seen, and they had, however, imperfectly looked. 3 months later, true to their word, my parents visited Seattle. I showed them my apartment with its photography books and prints covering the walls. I took them to my studio where they met Gabriella and saw my works in progress. I introduced them to Tasha and my other friends over dinner at my favorite restaurant. They tried in their way. My father asked questions about my equipment and techniques, focusing on the tangible aspects he could understand. My mother admired my decorating choices and mentioned several times how artistic my home was. They were awkward but genuine in their efforts to see the life I'd built. When Thanksgiving approached, they called to ask when I was coming home for the holiday. Instead of automatically accommodating or avoiding the question, I was honest. I'm not coming this year, I told them. I've made plans with friends here, but I'd love to video chat with everyone. There was a pause, then acceptance, rather than guilt or manipulation. A small victory, but significant. For my next major gallery opening 6 months after the wedding, I sent an invitation to my family without expectation. To my surprise, all of them came, my parents, Amelia and her husband, and Jackson. They stood somewhat out of place among the Seattle art crowd, but visibly proud as people praised my work. Tasha captured a photograph of us all together, my family looking at one of my largest pieces, their expressions thoughtful and engaged. In the image, for perhaps the first time, I was fully present and fully seen. That photograph now sits on my desk in Seattle, a reminder of how far we've all come and how far we still have to go. The journey from invisibility to recognition isn't complete and may never be perfect, but it has begun. I've learned that healing doesn't require forgetting or even complete forgiveness. It requires acknowledgement of wounds, effort toward understanding, and willingness to build something new even when the foundation is flawed. I've learned that sometimes you have to leave to be seen to create enough distance that your absence becomes noticeable. That visibility isn't given, but claimed sometimes quietly through excellence, sometimes loudly through confrontation. Most importantly, I've learned that family is both who we're born to and who we choose, that belonging can be found in unexpected places, with people who see us clearly from the start, that we all deserve to be visible, to be acknowledged, to be valued for exactly who we are. Have you ever had to make yourself visible in a place where you felt overlooked? How did you handle it? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button, subscribe to hear more stories of family dynamics and personal growth, and share with someone who might need to know they deserve to be seen. Thank you for listening to my journey from invisibility to recognition. Remember, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to disappear.